All first levels, or first moments of gameplay, have the unenviable task of selling the game to the player, hooking them in and getting them invested from the outset, often while teaching them the controls and introducing the core gameplay loop in a natural, almost subconscious way. Not an easy task, I'm sure, but if a game gets that balance right, you're probably going to find yourself watching its credits at some point in the future. Think of any really successful game and chances are it's got a great first level. But how many of them can say their opening scenes are historic, iconic gaming moments? Even people who have never played a Resident Evil game are familiar with that unsettling, bone-chilling head turn as the player stumbles blindly into that first zombie. That one moment exists almost separate from the franchise in popular culture, seen less as a Resident Evil moment and more as a symbol of the entire survival horror genre. It holds its own among key scenes in classic horror films, and in some cases may even outlive them. An entire generation of gamers were traumatized by this one scene. Not to get too far off topic, but the Resident Evil series has a pretty good track record for opening moments. The city streets in RE2 immediately illustrate to the player the differences between the first game and the second. More zombies, more freedom, a grander sense of scale, and the beginning of a series-long shift towards action. RE3 kinda shit the bed a little bit. So did Code Veronica. So did Zero. 3's opening isn't bad, it's just a bit stop and start for a while there, and it doesn't hold a candle to 1 and 2. It takes like 15 minutes to do what the first Resident Evil does in 1. But RE4 really knocked it out of the park. Everything from that opening cutscene to the bingo line, punctuated by the logo appearing on screen, is pure perfection. It sets everything up, then subverts the absolute fuck out of RE veterans' expectations. That entire village fight is pure adrenaline, and it's one of the most vivid gaming memories I have. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but 2 of the best opening scenes in the franchise come from 2 of my least favorite Resident Evil games, RE6 and Village. I won't go into detail, but they're amazing. It's hard for me to overstate just how important the first few minutes of Resident Evil is. Not just for the game, but for the franchise and survival horror as a genre. I honestly don't think I'm overselling it when I say if it wasn't for this specific encounter, Resident Evil might not have been nearly as successful as it was, and may not have gone on to become the franchise it is today. This is part 2 of Overthinking Resident Evil. We'll pick up where the previous episode left off, with the remaining members of Alpha Team entering the mansion, and cover the opening moments right up to the point where the game opens up and truly begins. It breaks up nicely into 5 sections. The entrance hall, the dining room, the tea room, then heading back through the dining room, finally ending back up at the entrance hall. Along the way, we'll take a close look at the gameplay and the mansion itself, as well as compare Chris and Jill's stories to see if maybe one feels more like the true version than the other.
Resident Evil.
I don't know what happened.
Barry! Where's Barry?
Well, I'm sorry, but he's probably...
No. What is that?
I'll go and check.
Look, to save us some time, I'm not gonna rip on the dialogue. It's bad, we all know it's bad, let's just get that out there and move on. But before we talk about the dialogue, I want to draw your attention to the camera work in this room, as well as the room itself. All the camera angles used in the entrance hall are distant, wide shots, which conveys the grand scale of the hall and, by extension, the mansion itself, to great effect. There's a feeling, an illusion of safety in this room, an illusion of control. Unlike some of the tight hallways or rooms with camera angles that cleverly obscure important details, as we'll see later, these ultra-wide shots of the relatively open room gives the player a strong sense of their surroundings. Nothing can really hide here, and you've got plenty of room to maneuver should an enemy ever appear. These shots, in combination with the way your footsteps on the marble floor echo throughout the room, really sell the idea of this being a huge opulent hall. Easier said than done in a game with fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds. It's a great example of how clever camera work and sound design can overcome budget or technological limitations, and that's something I'll never get tired of seeing. I'm a little out of my depth when it comes to discussing architecture, so I won't go into too much detail. The overall interior doesn't look too dissimilar to antebellum era mansion halls, though there's more of a Victorian era vibe than anything. This is much more noticeable in the remake too, which really zeroes in on a sort of Victorian Gothic interior. There's an abundance of marble in this room, plus what appears to be Greek Ionic columns. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Both details are visual shorthand for expensive, grand, classy, opulent, whatever. Also, the red rug seems to have a Native American pattern on it. I don't think it really means anything, I just think the designers took influence from The Shining's interiors. Possibly Twin Peaks as well, but that's something that's more apparent later in the game. I don't know, at least I don't think, that the game designers really bothered to put that much thought into the design from an architecture standpoint. I think they just wanted a creepy old mansion that wouldn't be out of place in a horror film. The entrance hall is also the closest thing we get to a hub in Resident Evil. From here you can access both first and second floors of both the east and west wings, right from the outset. So you'll be backtracking through this room a lot. And while there's no item box here, there is a typewriter, so you can save your game.
Okay, Jill and I will stay in the hall in case of an emergency.
Chris? Take care.
What is this?
Wow, what a mansion!
Captain Wesker, where's Chris?
Stop it! Don't open that door!
But Chris is...
What is it?
Maybe it's Chris.
Now, something I appreciate about the writing in these scenes are that they made a point to keep the broad strokes fairly similar between the two. They're always weirdly calm after making it inside the mansion, there's always one member of Alpha Team missing, and the catalyst for exploring the mansion is always the gunshot from somewhere in the West Wing. I'm not going to be too rough on them for being calm. It seems more like an issue with the script and technological limitations that come from animating people on the PS1 than any conscious decision. In both versions, Jill and Chris realize they're a man short, and Wesker's always the realist about their chances. But before we get a chance to discuss the ethics of leaving their teammate to die, there's a gunshot from somewhere in the West Wing. Both times someone asks what was that, like they'd never heard a gunshot before. And you know what? I said I wasn't going to rip on the dialogue, so let's just move on. The gunshot's a great way to keep the story flowing. It's the catalyst for exploration and comes in before we've overstayed our welcome in the entrance hall.
Now, Jill, can you go?
I'm going with you. Chris is our old partner, you know.
Okay, let me handle this. Stay alert!
Wesker asks Jill to investigate, which could be his way of informally beginning the BOW field test. Barry decides to go with her. Knowing what we know about Barry, maybe he wasn't comfortable being alone with Wesker. I'd say maybe he wanted a chance to tell Jill about what was going on, but he has plenty of chances to do that throughout the game and never does, so that can't be it. Maybe, feeling guilty about what he's doing, he tries to protect Jill and Chris as much as he can. Now let's compare what we've just seen to Chris's version. His intro flows a little more naturally from the cutscene. Jill's got her gun aimed at the door and is mentally still in the forest. No one's absent-mindedly walking around the hall taking in the sights, and Chris cuts straight to the chase.
Barry! Where's Barry?
Cue the gunshot and it's basically over. On one hand it feels lazier, but on the other it's more direct, more organic. Unlike with Jill, Wesker doesn't need to order Chris to check out the gunshot, he's already at it. Pretty ballsy considering he doesn't have a weapon.
A dining room.
You know, I think a good general rule for piecing together the true story behind Resident Evil is, if a character gets more love in any particular moment, then that character's version of events is probably the canonical one. And I don't think it's better exemplified than in the intro. Jill's got more going on in the entrance hall, as well as here in the dining room. Chris has nothing here, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing. We'll get to that a bit later. First, let's look at the initial impression we get of the dining room. Visually, it's very similar to the entrance hall. Same colors, materials, and general architecture. Similar pillars and carpet. The floor is this chessboard pattern, but I don't think that really means anything. Aside from what might be water damage on the ceiling, this room looks to be in great shape. One of the first things you notice coming into the room is the sound of the grandfather clock. You hear it before you see it. The sound pervades the entire space and subconsciously draws your attention to it. It's one of the key features of this room, not just visually and orally, but in the gameplay too. There's actually an interesting detail about the grandfather clock that tells us a little more about the mansion, though it is jumping ahead a little bit. There's a key to the attic located behind the grandfather clock. When you examine the grandfather clock, it's described as dusty, so it's likely that the key behind it hasn't been used for some time. As a result, the attic probably hasn't been accessed for quite a while either. Also, going to such great lengths to keep people out of the attic would imply that there's something pretty important in there. If you're familiar with the game, you know this theory doesn't quite check out, but I think it's worth looking into. Not right now though. Like I said earlier, the true version of events is likely the one with the most going on. Chris's trek through the dining room is a straight shot to the door, but Jill's actually has something more. First of all, she's with Barry. Second, there's a pool of blood by the fireplace.
What? What is this?
What is it?
Blood. Jill, see if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this. Hope this is not Chris's blood.
I said I'm not going to touch on the bad dialogue, but I do find it kind of ridiculous that Jill and Barry can see this fresh pool of blood on the floor and not immediately know what's up. That's neither here nor there, I guess. Looking at the blood, a few things jump out at me. First, it's a decent sized pool of blood. Second, it doesn't seem to have dried, meaning the incident was fairly recent. Third, there's no trail of blood or footprints leading to or from the pool of blood on the floor. We'll get into what all this means in a moment. It'll make more sense if we wait. Trust me. While we're here, I'd like to draw your attention to two things on the wall, the tapestries and the emblem. It's a bit hard to make out on the PS1, but the symbols on both tapestries and emblem appear to be the Spencer family coat of arms. That doesn't really have anything to do with anything, I just thought it was cool. There's not a whole else I want to say about the dining room. It looks like a relatively normal, if a bit fancy, dining area. It's a pretty common scene in a lot of horror films, but I don't believe it's a reference to anything. It's a room you could very easily see in the real world, which is a good thing. This helps the game stay grounded, and that groundedness, that realism, that's what sells the terror. Make things too goofy, too fantastic, and it stops being scary, because it stops being a thing that could happen in real life. Moving on. Let's check out Chris's version of the dining room. Chris's story feels a bit lackluster by comparison, but over time I've come to appreciate it for what it is. See, Jill's intro feels like the true intro, where stuff's actually going on, and the blood on the floor adds to the mystery and helps ramp up the tension before the first encounter. But the emptiness of Chris's version brings an entirely different, much more personal sense of dread. The player's alone, without a gun, moving deeper into the mansion. There's a creeping dread and a real feeling of vulnerability in that, where the environment and sound design do all the heavy lifting. The footsteps on the marble chessboard tiles, echoing up to the second floor hallways, off the ornate marble ceiling, the incessant tick-tock of the grandfather clock on the northern wall, the very deliberate lack of music. No bones about it, I like Jill's intro more, but I no longer think Chris's is lazy. It's just different. It does so much with so little. Like many great horror films, all it needs is great sound design, great camera work, and the space to let the fear of the unknown fester. It does this a lot better in the remake though. I think it's really clever how the developers framed this area. The entrance hall is all wide shots, making sure the player's spatial awareness is never messed with. They can always see where they are and what's around them. This is a stark contrast to the majority of the game, where things that are right in front of you can be obscured by the camera. The dining room is closer in shot composition to the entrance hall. It's mostly wide shots and the player's never really unsure of their place. But the camera does flirt with taking power away from the player. The main example being when entering the room through either door, it opens on a wide shot, but the camera is facing the player. So for the first half of the journey across the room, you're moving into the unknown. This room is never not safe, but first-time players don't know that. And when zombies start to appear in previously empty rooms, that fear, that lack of certainty, it's always going to be there. Granted, that happens way more in the remake, with the Crimson Heads and the zombies busting through doors and windows or whatever, but still. Another example that I personally love is how the camera facing the fireplace obscures the bloodstain on the floor by placing the end of the table in front of it. The camera controls the information and as a result has a strong hand in shaping the player's experience. And in no way is that more apparent than in the next room. Seriously, the more I think about this scene, the more I think it's a work of art. I mean, the room itself is pretty bare bones, but look at the camera angles. From the get-go, we're tight on the player, looking down at them with very little visible in either direction. The camera's withholding information from the player, and framing their character in a way that portrays them as vulnerable. The player is then forced to pick a direction with very little information to go off. It's a far cry from the previous two rooms. It does so much to build tension and adds so much to the atmosphere, even though you never really think about it. And that's the point, you're not supposed to. It's all visual, subconsciously processed information, the kind that bypasses logic and goes straight for emotion. Turn right, away from the camera, and you'll find 3 locked doors. I really dig this because it funnels the player in the other direction, but does so in a way that doesn't kill immersion. 2 doors are locked from the other side and one needs a lockpick or a key. So you know you'll access these rooms eventually, and in some cases you'll return here through these rooms. But say you went left. Look at the camera here. It's so well positioned. It puts Chris or Jill right on the edge of danger, but keeps the player at a distance and keeps the rest of the room hidden behind the edge of the hallway. This distance does nothing to buffer the player from the tension. Instead, it emphasizes that lack of control that pervades the entire game. You're standing uncomfortably close to the danger, but if you want to see what's in the room, you first have to take a few more steps into it. I love this so much. The game's holding all the cards and calling the shots. And just like that, we get our first look at the room, our first look at Kenneth, but we don't exactly have the time to take it all in. We've disturbed the zombie that killed our friend, and now it's after us. I think some of the magic is lost on me now. I didn't play this game until I was in my 20s, and by then I had beaten a couple of RE games, so I kinda knew what was up. But if I played this game when it came out, this scene would have given me nightmares. You can fight or you can run. Running's objectively the smart thing to do. Chris doesn't have a gun and Jill can't spare the ammo. If you do manage to take down the zombie, you can then inspect Kenneth's body. Once more, not gonna rip on the dialogue. They tried their best, probably. Anyway, I don't see any gun, but you find some pistol ammo on his corpse, so the shot we heard earlier was probably fired right here. We'll get more into that later. If you run away as Jill, this happens.
Barry?
What is it?
Watch out! It's a monster!
Let me take care of this. What is it?
Kenneth was killed too. Maybe by this creature. Anyway, let's report this to Wesker.
It kind of annoys me how Barry's using a Magnum and it still takes 3 bullets to take down a regular zombie. This is very off topic, but I was watching this video when I was supposed to be working on this one, and I learned that the actor that played Barry is Aussie. I'm not a particularly patriotic dude, and I get that Australia is not exactly some unknown place, but I'm always so stoked to see an Australian actor in something cool. I don't know why, I had nothing to do with it, but it just makes me so happy. I'll link the video in the description too. It's fun and wholesome and definitely worth the watch if you're a classic Resident Evil fan. Alright, let's keep going. There's not a whole lot to say about this room in terms of environmental detail. The hallway is super bare bones, but relatively clean looking. I do have some theories about this hall, but let's save them for another time. I love how in this hallway, there's quite a few lights, but they still leave a lot of shadow in the edges of the room. It's a minor detail, but it does so much to boost the atmosphere. It's a relatively normal looking hall, not too dissimilar from something you'd see in real life. And unlike the entrance hall or dining room, this is a hall you could totally see in a normal suburban home. There's a warmth to it, but those shadows, in combination with the camera work, really instill a sense of dread that isn't lessened by that warmth, but exponentially increased by it. This area is very much a liminal space, linking the kitchen, the bar, the dining room, and the tea room. There's a practicality to it. Meals prepped in the kitchen, then brought up to the dining room, the tea room, or the bar. I love how, despite the absolute insanity of this mansion, it's still got this grounded, practical nature to it at times. Couple things I want to say about the tea room before we continue. The tea room itself seems like it doesn't get used. Compared to the dining room or the bar, it looks decorative, like they didn't know what to do with the space. And the picture above the couch is supposed to be of the mansion we're in, but it doesn't exactly look like it. My theory is this is actually a photo of the real Spencer Mansion. Not this one, but the one this one was based on. It's going into future games canon, and I know I said we're not going to do that, so take all of this with a grain of salt. We see in Resident Evil 5 that the real Spencer Mansion is on a cliff. The mansion in this picture looks like it's on a cliff as well, so that kind of links the two, I guess. Also, let's compare the sound design in this room to the one before. The dining room has the booming grandfather clock echoing throughout it. The tea room, on the other hand, has absolute claustrophobic silence. No hint as to what's coming. To me, this feels a bit like sacrificing realism or aesthetic consistency for the sake of the scene, and I'm okay with that. Hearing the zombie chewing or moaning before the encounter would have tipped the player off to what they're walking into. Then again, maybe hearing the distant moaning of the zombie, but not being able to see it, and then having to walk towards it to progress the game, could have been a really tense moment. I'm overthinking it. One more thing I want to touch on is the zombie itself. He looks like he could have been a groundskeeper or a gamekeeper or something, but judging by his place in the mansion, maybe he was a butler or a housekeeper. He was found in the dining room, so maybe he was setting the table when he turned. I don't know. Let's move on. After finding Kenneth, I think now we can say with confidence that the pool of blood in the dining room is his. Kenneth seemed like such a cool character. I really wish we got to see more of Bravo Team. It could have given us a strong motivation to explore the mansion and made the moments we find them more impactful. It is what it is. Earlier, I pointed out 3 details about the blood. Now that we know who it's from, we can sort of make sense of those details. The size of the pool is quite large. The blood looks fresh, and there's no trail to or from the blood. The lack of a trail means the pool of blood is almost definitely where the injury took place. The color of the blood says the injury is very recent. The size of the pool means the injury wasn't minor. My money's on the injury being a bite to the jugular. Something like that would have made a lot of mess in a short time, and it would have been a deal breaker for Kenneth, even if he managed to drop the zombie. As for how he got taken out by a single zombie, let's look around the room. The dining room is one of the most opulent, well-kept rooms in the entire mansion, and despite everything that happened outside, Kenneth's experience in the mansion's interior is limited simply to the entrance hall and the dining room. So as far as he's concerned, this place could be safe. And by the look of it, people are here, people that could help him. So if he saw somebody over by the fireplace on the other side of the room, he probably wouldn't have any issue approaching them, so his guard would have been down. My guess is that's exactly what he did. The zombie spun around and took a chunk out of his neck, and Kenneth, clutching the wound, probably ran for the door. He might have had time to check the other doors in the hallway, only to find that they were locked, but more likely he took a wrong turn and got himself cornered. Starting to lose consciousness, he had just enough time to pull out his gun and fire off a shot before the zombie got to him. As for why his head separated from his body, maybe the zombie was drawn to the open wound in his neck. This is a bit flimsy, but I mean, it's not like there's any other possibilities. Let's keep going.
Wesker? Jill? What happened to Jill and Wesker?
Chris arrives back in the main hall to find it deserted. Jill's gun is on the floor, which raises more questions. Jill's not careless, so it's clear she would have either dropped it in a struggle or if she had to suddenly run away or something. But there's no evidence of anything like that, just the gun on the floor. Wesker obviously took her while he had the chance. There's a bunch of questions that brings up, like how did he lug a likely unconscious Jill all the way to the lab while fending off zombies? But whatever, I think we're just supposed to roll with it.
Wesker!
Help me look for him, Jill. And don't leave this hall for the time being.
Jill's story goes differently. Barry asks her to help him search for Wesker, while also not leaving the room. It's kind of a weird request, as there aren't exactly many places to hide here. I do like this though, as it gives the player a chance to get more familiar with the room's layout, while also stewing in the tension and the mystery of the situation.
Find anything, Jill?
Nothing. What is this all about? I can't figure it out at all.
Beats me too.
Now it's Wesker's time to disappear. I don't know what's going on.
Well, it can't be helped. Let's search for him separately. I'll check the dining room again.
Okay, I'll try the door on the opposite side.
This mansion is gigantic. We could get into trouble if we get lost. We should start from the first floor, okay? And Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
Thanks. Maybe I'll need it.
Listen, if something happens, let's meet up in this hall. This time, I'll be there.
Eventually, there's another cutscene where Barry says he's gonna check the dining room again, and Jill says she'll check the opposite door. Barry also says to stick to the first floor for now. From here, the game opens up, and you can more or less go to whatever floor or wing you want. But this is a natural way to nudge the player in the right direction without putting blinkers on or forcing them to go that way. He also says to meet back here if anything happens, which reinforces this room's role as a sort of hub area. If you decide to take the hint, you'll find the map of the first floor, as well as two of some of the most iconic and memorable scenes in the game, but we'll dive into that next episode. Alright, this episode has gone on entirely too long. It's a bit all over the place at times, but I hope you enjoyed it. I'm aiming to get one out a week, but they take a lot of work to make, so I can't really guarantee that. All I can do is try. Thanks for watching, I am truly grateful for all of you, and I will see you around.
Go,